So superficially, one of those is about a career regret. One of those is about a travel regret. One of those is about a romance regret. But I think deep down, they're all about the same thing. Whereas and it's one of the core regrets that people have. You're at a juncture in your life where you can take a chance or you can play it safe. And overwhelmingly, people regret not taking the chance.
Welcome to It Gets Late Early. Today, I am joined by the New York Times bestselling author, Daniel Pink. Do we go by Dan or Daniel? I should have asked you that.
Either one. I mean, introduce me as Daniel. You can call me Dan, though. That's cool.
Okay.
I mean, I asked you off air.
Dan and Mo.
Dan and Mo. Dan and Mo. It sounds like a vaudeville act.
It does. It does. I'm kind of into it. But anyhow, welcome to the show. I am so glad you're here. You're a really special guest for me because quite literally, I'm not sure that this show would exist without me having read the book of the topic of our discussion today, which is The Power of Regret. And when I was reading it, I had this inkling that I wanted to create a show and a space for people to talk openly about the elephant of the room, which is ageism in the workplace, something that everyone feels and is kind of just under the surface, and yet no one really talks about. And it was reading your book that pushed me off the ledge to create this platform in the show. So I want to offer you really, truly a heartfelt thank you, because without you, we might not be here. So
that's
thanks
great
a lot.
to hear. Thanks for keeping me in the writing business for a tiny bit longer.
I love it. I think you're doing a really good job in that regard. So it was a totally formative read for me, and something that frankly I wish I'd been able to read decades earlier. If it had existed, I am not sure though that I would have picked it up, because I think in our younger years we might not consider these ramifications of our actions and whatnot in the same way that we do as we age. So it's a really interesting topic, and I'm super glad that you're here to share your thoughts about it. So I think diving in, I would love to hear, this topic of regrets. I mean, we live in the US where I feel there's quite a culture of sort of toxic positivity where people don't like to get uncomfortable, and that's somewhat human nature. So what was it that sparked this interest to do this big study into this emotion that a lot of people want to shove under the rug instead?
I mean, it's pretty easy. I mean, because I had regrets, and I think it's connected to age. I would not have written this book in my 30s. But, in my 50s, it was kind of inevitable because my life had changed not in any kind of dramatic or bad way. It's just simply that all of us we hope get to the point where you're old enough that you're like, oh, holy crap, I have more of my life behind me than ahead of me. And that concentrates the mind.
I think that's absolutely true. And I think we have a culture that glorifies youth and achievement. And it's something that I think pushes us all towards these ageist beliefs, whether we know it or not, right?
Yeah, I mean, youth is great. And here's the thing. It's like, I know, youth is great. And also, you mentioned positivity. I agree with you that we're over-indexed on positivity in America. Now, that said, positive emotions are really important. And our life is better when we have lots of positive emotions. Optimism in general is healthier than pessimism, significantly. But it doesn't mean that we should be positive all the time. That negative emotions teach us, that negative emotions are important, that negative emotions are instructive. And also this idea that we should never look backward and always look forward is bad advice. And so that's what I was trying to do. So at some level, the initial spark was reckoning with my own regrets as someone who had completed half of his life, we think, or half of his life, and also trying to make sense of what do we do with this very human phenomenon that sometimes we feel bad.
Yeah. And we often just run away and block those feelings. And I think that's just emblematic of the whole concept of no regrets, which whenever I say that term, I always think of that meme that has the misspelling no regrets. Right. It makes me crack up. But of course we have regrets. I've had regrets since youth. And I think one thing that I haven't been able to uncouple is the feeling of regret and the I feel accompanying feeling of shame. And so how did you move through the shame associated with your regrets in order to do this really vast study on how people feel about this emotion that we want to walk away from?
This is a really important question, and it's important that as human beings that we like call things by the right name, that we identify, not that we call them by the right names, but that we identify things correctly. Let me give you an example. I'll give you one example of this. The difference between regret and disappointment. All right.
Mm.
You can be like, I'm disappointed this week here in Washington, D.C., that it's been overcast all week. And there's like, and it's a short days and it's overcast. I can't have regret about that because I don't cause the weather. Okay. So with regret, you have to have agency, and disappointment, you don't have agency. And it's very important knowing where you have agency, where you have control, and where you don't have control. So that's one thing. Now, when it comes to something like shame, let's take shame, and the difference between like shame and say guilt, which is a facet of regret. It's sort of a regret with a moral cast to it. It's very important to know the difference between say guilt and shame, and for our own well-being. Guilt is I did a bad thing. Shame is I'm a bad person. And there are plenty of times when we've done bad things. All of us have done bad things, but most of us actually are not bad people. And so if you do a bad thing and immediately leap to declare yourself a bad person because of that, that's not good.
Not healthy.
It's not healthy. That's that's toxic negativity in a way. And so it's important that we categorize. It's important that we, especially when it comes to negative emotions, that we triangulate, as you were sort of hinting at before. You don't want to ignore your negative emotions. You don't want to wallow in your negative emotions. You want to confront them. You want to think about them. You want to analyze them. You want to use them as information. And when you do that, your negative emotions are instructive. And then when we pile up these negative emotions that human beings have, the most prominent, the most useful is regret.
I love that take. And I think it's a really good segue into what the thesis of your book is and what you uncovered from your research. Can you tell us a little bit about the types of regrets that you uncovered and how you did your study?
Sure. Let me take the second part first. So what I did to analyze this emotion or there are three legs to the stool. The first one is that I looked at about, I don't know, maybe 50, 60 years of research on this emotion. This is emotion that's been studied by psychologists and has been studied by economists. Some of the studies began in the Cold War with these sort of like game theorists. Neuroscientists have studied it. Cognitive scientists have studied it. Many kinds of medical fields have studied it. So there's a lot of research on the issue. That's one thing. The second thing that I did is that I did basically a massive public opinion survey, a quantitative study, the largest public opinion survey ever conducted on American attitudes about regret. And then the third leg of the stool was something called the World Regret Survey, where I invited people around the world to submit a big regret. And we now have a collection of 26,000 regrets from people in over 130 countries. And so using those three things, the research, the quantitative results of this American survey, and this massive database of regrets around the world, that's how I was able to come to these conclusions about this misunderstood emotion.
That's awesome. And so once you saw all of the responses and you did all that research, you basically categorized regrets into a few different sections. Can you tell us about those?
Yeah, I categorized it. So in the quantitative, I don't want to get in the weeds too much, but in the quantitative, the public opinion survey, I asked people to put their regrets into a category like career, family, romance, whatever. And it wasn't very revealing. And in the qualitative one, where I collected all these regrets and I started reading through them, I realized that I was asking the wrong question there. And that what was going on with these regrets was something beneath the surface. I'll give you an example of that. So we had plenty of people in this, lots of people who regretted, I always wanted to start a business, but I never did it because I was too scared. Okay. And I stayed in this lackluster dead end job. We had other people who said, I always wanted to travel to this place or that place, or I wanted to study abroad when I was in college, but I was a little bit scared to do it, so I didn't do it. We have hundreds of people who said there was somebody who X years ago who I really liked. I wanted to ask them out on a date, but I wimped out and I've regretted it ever since. Okay, so superficially, one of those is about a career regret. One of those is about a travel regret. One of those is about a romance regret. But I think deep down, they're all about the same thing. Whereas and it's one of the core regrets that people have. You're at a juncture in your life where you can take a chance or you can play it safe. And overwhelmingly, people regret not taking the chance. Not every single time, but a lot of the time. And it doesn't matter the domain of life. So that's what I call boldness regret. Another regret are the what I call foundation regrets, which are small decisions early in life that accumulate to terrible consequences later on. So you see it in health. I never ever really exercised, never ate right, and now I have a chronic disease or I'm woefully overweight. I didn't. I never saved any money. I always spent too much money, and now I'm broke. So that's foundation regrets. More regrets, which we talked about a little bit, are I was at a juncture in my life where I could have done the right thing, and I could have done the wrong thing, and I did the wrong thing, and now I regret it. That's a moral regret. And finally, our connection regrets, which are about relationships that have come apart and people want to reach out, but they don't. And then they regret it. So the 4 core regrets are foundation regrets. If only I'd done the work. Boldness regrets. If only I'd taken the chance. Moral regrets. If only I'd done the right thing. And connection regrets. If only I'd reached out.
Mine was absolutely a boldness regret, a potential future boldness regret that pushed me off the ledge to take the chance to start the show.
It's
right?
Anticipating, but that's smart, man. Because
thanks to you.
So what we want to do is so you're talking about anticipating regrets. So I mean, one of the things that's kind of amazing about among the many amazing things about human beings and our brain is our capacity to travel through time. And so regret takes regret enlists our brain's time travel ability. So we hop in a time machine, we go back in time and essentially make a different decision in the past. Then we return to the present, but the present is now different because of the decision we made in the imaginary past. That's amazing cognitive firepower. But we can also do the same thing. You can also imagine yourself into the future and say, what kind of life do I want to be living? And say, if I do this, I'll lead this kind of life. If I do that, I'll lead that kind of life. Oh, wow, that's very instructive. I can imagine what my life is going to be like, and then I'm going to go back on my time machine from the future and go back to the present and do something differerly because of what I imagine in the future. I mean, I'm looking outside my window here in my office, and it's there's some squirrels. I don't think the squirrels running around my backyard can do that. I think it's something about the human brain that allows us to do that it's there for a reason. And so for you, anticipating the regret, anticipating regrets is not always the right thing to do, but it can be the right thing to do if we anticipate the right regrets.
Yeah. I mean, for me, I realized that looking at future me, the only thing that would have hurt more than doing it and having it fail was not knowing what could have been, right?
Exactly.
And so you got to shoot your shot.
But Maureen, that's like hundreds and hundreds of people say basically, hundreds of people have those kinds of regrets in this database. Saying I would have been okay if it went south on me, but I don't know how it would have turned out.
You got to shoot the shot. And
Absolutely.
I think that's also something that comes with age. I mean, this was something I drew upon, and it gave me strength and confidence as I moved into this new world that I'm in. It was like, I've done a lot of stuff. I've had a lot of fits and starts. I've tried things. They've failed. I've, given things a shot. I played basketball until high school when my younger sister started over me in the team. And I was like, I can't handle this. But at least I knew, because I tried to, go for the team. And I knew that ultimately I was going to get through anything that life threw my way. And so I was like, you know what? If this crashes and burns, at least I'll know. And that gave me solace. And so I was able to do that. Now that's something that was harder back in my earlier years. I might have, put a lot more weight on failure. And over time, you just learn everyone's kind of making it up as they go along.
Absolutely.
And everyone's failing, and you got to fail up, right? And, when you think about the tech world too, it's like everyone thinks about the minimum viable product. Like, what is the absolute lowest bar that will work, right? And so why don't we think that way? And so that's what drove me to do this. And I'm really grateful that I did. But I think it's something that's deeply uncomfortable for a lot of people. And yet the current reality of our times is that we are going to see more and more people, not by choice, but by necessity, shifting into new pivots in their careers. We're going to move into more of a gig economy for all types of workers. And, I think I hope that people can go into it with a bit of boldness and a bit of assuredness that maybe would have been difficult earlier in their careers. But, talking about careers specifically, because that's what this show is really about, is how we get older in the workplace, which is everybody every day, because that's just, living. But talk to me a little bit about what your research uncovered when it comes to people's career regrets. What did you see, and what can we draw from those lessons?
I mean, a lot of the career regrets were regrets of boldness, in different kinds of stripes. So one of my I think one of the most poignant lines of somebody said was a guy from, I think it was from the United Kingdom, who said something like, I haven't taken enough risks in my work life. This is his phrase that I remember. He says, I focused on not failing rather than succeeding. And so you had a lot of people, so you had those kinds of things saying I was too timid, essentially. You have other people more specifically, more concretely saying, I wish I had started a business. I had entrepreneurial dreams. I had entrepreneurial things I wanted to do, but I was too chicken to do it. And I don't know, to your point earlier, I don't know whether it would have panned out, but I don't know. And not knowing that is painful. And I didn't give it a shot. There also are I think this is pretty interesting, maybe more should have been, shows you one's own kind of perspective. It was surprising to me, might be less surprising to people who are not, straight white middle-aged men, is how many people had regrets about speaking up. So they said, I wanted to speak up at work. I wanted to say my piece. But I categorize that as a kind of a boldness regret, even though a lot of the onus on that is not on the person, but on the situation they're in, about being in an environment, being in a setting where they didn't have the psychological safety to speak up. So a lot of the regrets about boldness, a lot of the regrets on careers did circle around boldness. Now, there were a few other ones about, there was just one that I remember, poignant one about someone talking about working at the same place for 30 years and not really knowing anybody and not really connecting with anybody. So it was sort of a connection regret on that one. And then there were people, this surprised me. There were people who, it's really sort of adjacent to education, in that they said, I would have been better in my career if I had actually worked harder in school and paid more attention in school, because it's a foundation regret. I ended up not doing the work, just kind of phoning in. And now actually I don't have the skills that I need at work.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's accurate. And foundation regrets, I feel, in some ways might be the hardest of all, right? Because it's like you cannot go back in time and lay a foundation. So what's your advice to people who really need to start over foundationally?
Start now.
I like that. I think you had a
it's
quote
true.
in there.
I can see on Kindle the most underlined phrases. And one of the most underlined phrases in this book is me quoting a Chinese proverb. I almost didn't even put this in the book because I thought, it's like, okay, so it's like, oh, I think people have heard this before and it's not that interesting. And but the Chinese proverb says the best time to plant a tree is 20 years ago. Second best time is today. And so it's true though. So start now, guys. But foundation regrets are difficult because you can't go back and undo it. There are other kinds of things that we do where you can, with moral regrets, for instance, say you've hurt somebody, you can go back and apologize. You can try to make restitution. You can make amends, et cetera, et cetera. You can extinguish the guilt you feel. You can do something about that. Connection regrets, if you haven't reached out, you can reach out. But the foundation regrets take more. If you haven't eaten right or exercised for 25 years, having a kale salad this afternoon ain't going to do it fully. Now, it's a good start.
Yeah.
It's a good start. Today, have a kale salad and a walk around the block, but you're going to have to do that for a while. You're not going to be able to turn it around instantly.
Wouldn't it be nice if that were true? I wish, man.
Could be.
Next world, perhaps.
Yeah.
I think a lot of this comes down to lived experience, building confidence, understanding things will be okay, and building that muscle, right? And I hope that people will go and read this book, because it, for me, was so absolutely formative. It was like, okay, I have a choice, right? Like, I cannot go back. You got to control what you can control. And
exactly.
It's hard to be self-compassionate enough to allow yourself those mistakes. But I always try to tell myself when I'm having these moments, what would you say to a friend? You would never talk to a friend the way you talk to yourself. Your self-talk is so gross. It's
Yep.
awful. Like, get it
Yep.
out of here.
Yep.
And that's something that I really wish I'd known when I was younger. And something, I'm thinking about this, and I'm thinking about how do we get these generations to work better together in the workplace, and how do we inspire intergenerational collaboration? And I think to myself, gosh, if we could get people who are earlier in their careers, earlier in their lives, to read your book, like, how amazing would that be? And so, do you have any advice on how we can open the door to these
I
conversations
don't
with
know.
people who are younger?
Maybe. I mean, I'm not sure. I do think that there is something about ideas in general and books in particular that they, it has to be the right idea, but it also has to be for the recipient the right time. And
Yeah, that's
so
fair.
sometimes you just don't have that match. And I mean, it's true, and that's fine. And so I don't know whether I would have been, persuaded by this book if I read it when I was 33 years old. I don't think so.
Right.
I
Yeah,
don't
I
know if I would.
wonder.
I don't know if I would. I don't know if I would have picked it up. But there is something to be said for putting ideas out there, and and even if it's not the exact right moment for a particular person, that if you do it with enough gusto, that 8 years later, 12 years later, they might say, "Oh,
Rings a
oh."
bell.
And I think I mean, I've talked to teachers who have that kind of, I mean, I've had that experience myself, not as a, as a learner, not as a teacher, where it's like something that I learned in school suddenly made sense 12 years later because I was in a situation or had become a kind of person for whom that something made sense.
Yeah, you like, connect the dots in a different way as you get older, and it will spark, a memory, a trip, throw up a
You
memory for you.
you might not, yeah, you just might not have the capacity to see things,
Yeah.
even if it's right in front of you, but you wait 10 years and your vision has changed and then you can see it.
It's so interesting though, because when you think about it, we have this youth focused culture where we worship at the altar of the youth. We're obsessed with it. And we have 30 under 30 Forbes list and everybody wants to be on it. And it's like, you're a has been if you haven't. And there's just this like constant focus on productivity and innovation and whatnot. It's funny that that doesn't translate into a desire to learn from people who've come before in that sense, like in a more direct way. So I wonder how that message can move.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's some of that. I think
Yeah.
there is some desire. I think there is some desire for that. I mean, I've always thought that there should be this kind of, bi-directional
Yes.
mentorship.
Mentorship.
Yeah,
100% doesn't go one way.
yeah, exactly. So that the younger folks could mentor the older folks, and the older folks could mentor the younger folks.
Yeah. Man, it's an interesting thought to contemplate, what would have it been like if I had read your book that many years ago. It's dang it, too bad.
But you
Too
might not
bad
have been.
for
It
me.
might not. The person you were
Might not
then
have
might
hit.
not have been ready to
Might not
receive
hit.
it.
Yeah, it's very true. I want to ask you a question for those of us in this audience who are ADHD. So I found out at the ripe old age of 36 that I have ADHD. And it's something that I think I have a hard time with because it's coupled with a lot of regret for me because I didn't understand my brain earlier growing up. And, one thing that's really hard for me is being present and trying, I think we're all trying to do too much. I think this world lends itself to chaos and we all have too many responsibilities, just kind of the way society is. But, one thing that I really grappled with, and I think this is true of all women and parents, but I really grappled with how do I be both a good parent and grow my career once I became a mother. And, I think I've also learned that ADHD is coupled with memory problems. And so when I think back to when I had my first child and I was thrust into this new role as mother, I have a lot of regret and frankly shame and guilt because I don't have the memories of that time that
Oh,
other people do. And I was juggling and struggling and I didn't have a way to voice that or connect with people on it. And I think it's something I just have a lot of personal regret about.
mhm.
And so I wonder if you have any advice to people who might have this sort of a regret.
I think it's a lot of people who have exactly the same kinds of regret,
Yeah.
and they don't have ADHD,
Yeah.
because being a parent of a little person is incredibly emotionally and physically taxing to the point where your brain is expending its limited energy on getting through the freaking day, not necessarily storing memories for your future self. And so I mean, see,
That's fair.
it strikes me as it strikes me as utterly normal. I mean, what would you say to someone who came to you with that problem?
I'd
The
probably
same
be nicer than I am to myself.
bingo, yeah,
There
exactly.
you
And
go.
so this is self compassion. This is one of the most
Yeah.
important ways to begin overcoming regret. And self compassion is basically treating yourself with kindness rather than contempt. And it doesn't mean. Here's the thing that's the mistake that people make. It doesn't mean treating yourself better than anybody else. Self-compassion doesn't say, "Oh, you're at a higher level than other people. You need to treat yourself better than you would treat anybody else." No, what it's saying is that don't treat yourself worse than anybody else,
Yeah.
because there's no advantage of that. Just treat yourself with kindness rather than contempt. Treat yourself with the same kindness you treat somebody else. And when we do that, there actually are pretty. I was really blown away by the research in self-compassion and how useful it is. And also, I was blown away by the absence of evidence of this kind of lacerating self-criticism as a performance enhancer. It's really not.
Hmm. That's really interesting. I think we would all be well advised to heed your advice there and be a little bit kinder to ourselves. Something I think a lot of people struggle with. So, thinking on your own life, do you have any top regrets that you're willing to share with us?
Sure, I have lots of regrets. I mean, that's one reason I wrote this. That's one reason I wrote this book. I have regrets of kindness, especially earlier in my life, when um, I was really intrigued by some of the regrets that we uncovered about bullying, where
Mm,
lots of people had regrets about bullying other people, not having been bullied, but bullying other people. Several of them would try to go back and find the people who they bullied to apologize. I never did anything like that. I was never a bully. But I was in situations where, people were not being treated well. I knew people were not being treated well, and I didn't say anything. And it bugs me. And so the real question is, what do you do? What the real question is, what do you do with that? Do you turn on the self-lacerating machine and start whipping yourself for that as like you're a horrible person? Do you go, but going back to your shame point, do you feel a sense of shame? Do you say, no, I did a bad thing, but I'm a bad person? No, I think that's a bad idea. Do you say, oh, it doesn't matter, it's in the past, don't never look backward? I think that's a bad idea too. I think what you say is like, whoa, this thing that from these things from decades ago still bug me. That's telling me something. And what it's telling me is that, it's telling me a lot of things. It's telling me that I value kindness more than I might realize. And it's also telling me that that future me is going to be far more satisfied if current me is a little kinder. And so again, this is the thing about regret. It clarifies what we value and it instructs us on how to live.
I love that. Now, for the people in the audience who want to go and do a retrospective analysis on their lives and use it to power their future, what are some easy steps that you can suggest for people to do that? If there are any, are there easy steps? I don't know.
I would start small. I would think about, I would think about, what are three regrets you have in your life? All right. And, and then really interrogate it and make sure it's a regret, not a disappointment. So ask find three big regrets you have in your life. But then don't stop there. I think what you also have to do is you have to say, what is this regret telling me? What is it telling me about what I value? And what lesson is it teaching me? And so if you have a regret about not starting a business, what is that regret telling you? It's telling you that you value boldness, you value risk taking. The lesson is, I think, try something before it's too late. And so identify three of your regrets. Really think hard about. Make sure it's a regret. Really think hard about what lesson it's offering to you, because that's what it is. That emotion that you're feeling is coming with it, a kind of like you know a little fortune cookie, with there's a message in it, And so what is the message? What is the message saying? And then, but it's still not there. Then say, what am I going to do next to um, to act on this. And to me, that's the most important thing. You don't, as I said before, you don't ignore your regrets. You don't wallow in them. You look at them as a signal. You look at them as information. What is this teaching me? And what is it? How is it instructing me about what I should do next?
That is so awesome. I mean, it's such a powerful message. I know it moved me so much, and I'm just really grateful that you decided to come on the show and share a little bit more about your own journey of writing the book and the lessons that you drew from all of the research you did. So thank you so much. And gosh, I'm just grateful that I made the ask too, because I thought, he's probably too busy, he probably can't come. I would have had a future boldness regret if I hadn't asked you. So
And now you might have a regret about, I shouldn't have asked the guy because this interview was so boring.
stop it. Stop it. That's amazing. Thank you so much for being here. This was awesome.
Total pleasure. Thanks for having me.